Heard that. All right, welcome everybody to today's session. We're going to be talking about how to present the value of competitive intelligence to senior leadership. Super excited to have this session today. I just hit the button, so we're just going to let everyone flood in. We'll give it about a minute or so, and then we'll jump right into the session. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll try and get everybody out a little early. We won't do the full hour, just as a heads up. I know everyone's got back to back to back and all that good stuff. So we won't, we'll give you a few minutes at the end. All right. So by way of introduction, my name is Sheila Lehar. I'm VP of Content Marketing here at Crayon. For those unfamiliar with Crayon, we're a competitive intelligence platform. You can learn more at crayon.co. Not crayon.com, different vendor, get that all the time. So to go to crayon.co if you want to learn a little more about how to track your competitive intelligence, enable your sales and revenue teams. And we're going to get started. So welcome. A little agenda to set the tone for today. We're going to do some intros. We're going to talk a little bit about best practices and tips around how you can better present, better speak to your senior leadership teams about competitive intelligence. And then we've got some examples actually that we're going to talk through. And these are actual slide decks from other companies that are doing CI. So we'll talk a little bit about those, sort of what works, what doesn't, a little slide breakdown for everybody. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A as well. So a few housekeeping items. This will be recorded, this session, so everyone's going to get the recording in their inbox. If you've got to jump, feel free. Again, you'll get the recording. And then if you've got questions throughout the presentation, just throw them in that Q&A box that you see. And we have Connor Bond on my team who's going to go through those, and we'll pause kind of throughout, and we'll also leave some time at the end to go through any of those questions. So throw them in there if you got them. All right, and we're jumping right into today's speakers. So we got Rachel Pangburn, who's Market and Competitive Intelligence Manager at RF Smart, also a Crayon customer. Thank you for joining us today, Rachel. And then we've also got Garrett Denny, who's at Crayon, our VP of Marketing and Competitive Intelligence as well. Previous to Crayon, Garrett also was a customer of Crayon's at Jamf. So he's got lots of great expertise around competitive intelligence. And I'll just throw this out there that Rachel's team is hiring for competitive intelligence. So if anyone's curious, they can get in touch with Rachel. But I know some people are looking potentially right now, so their team's growing and they're hiring. So if that speaks to anyone, just let Rachel know and she can send the job description your way. All right, so let's jump into the content. And I just wanted to set the tone a little bit around getting support for your Compete program. So given, I think, everything that's been going on this year, there's been a lot of upheaval, a lot of layoffs, a lot of restructuring. And this is sort of something that we've been hearing from our customers here at Crayon, that they need to sort of build support for their Compete program all over again. So there might be some, again, like restructuring internally. And this is just something to keep in mind, because I think this has, again, been happening quite a bit, where if you're getting moved, if you've got new managers, they don't all of a sudden have the history, or may not have as much history as you have. So it's really important, if you're in that situation, just to recognize that you might need to sort of rebuild that support for your Compete program. So I just wanted to kind of start there, and then we'll get into some of the content with Rachel and Garrett. So my first sort of question is going to be over to Garrett. We're going to talk about communication cadence and what's kind of ideal when you're dealing with your senior leadership. They're obviously quite busy people. So Garrett, let's sort of pass it over to you, and we'll get into this sort of when you're thinking about how you communicate the value of your competitive intelligence program. What are you thinking about in terms of who on the management team you're speaking with, and then how often you're communicating with them?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And hey, everyone, Garrett, good to be on the webinar. Thanks for joining us. I think when I tackle a question like this, my brain first goes to what's your baseline? What does the program look like today? And if you're a company that's going from 0 to 1, it looks very different than a company that has a couple of years of history behind it, right? Because then you've got history to draw on. And you also have some landmines that you can pretty easily avoid because the program's been in existence. You've seen a little bit of what works and probably a little bit of what doesn't. So for the first group, if you're going 0 to 1, I would encourage you to start by just talking to your stakeholders in a very direct manner. I talk a lot about this on our webinars and at conferences that product marketing is a very young discipline. We are still teaching senior executives the value of our profession. And I think this is the perfect springboard for you to step up, to be more authoritative, and to say, look, we have this valuable program. A lot of the questions you are asking as a senior leader, we can help you solve. How often do you want that data? Is it useful to have that every single week? That seems like a lot, but maybe it's right for you. Or is it better to bring this up, rolled up at a QBR and set a baseline? See how it works, track that over time, and again, be very direct. This is something that I think as marketers, we tend to be very nice people, very kind people. I love working with marketers, but that can work to your detriment. You can really step up here in a room with senior executives and have that loud, bold voice. Own the value that you're bringing to the business. This isn't just a marketing program. This is getting at the core of how that business is performing. So I would say, again, speak boldly, be empowered here, set that baseline, see what works. And if you are on the flip side of that and you've got that historic data of what's worked and what's not, start there. Again, have the same kind of conversation, drive it back to business value. This isn't just about data and a program, it's about the underlying company.
Awesome.
Just one piece that I would add to that of what Garrett was saying was just knowing your audience. So what management team are you talking to? The content that you're going to want to provide an executive leadership team looks really different than your sales leaders. And what they need to know maybe more on a monthly basis, or if they're interested on a weekly basis, what you would show from a bi-yearly perspective to our executive teams would be very different. So just knowing that audience, and that really ties up to where Sheila level set us at the beginning of the conversation of if you're building support, if it's once again, you're building support, knowing those teams that you directly work for. And then as everyone knows on this call, all 107 of you, the massive amount of different groups of stakeholders that we support with competitive intel.
That's a great point, Rachel. And sort of in that same vein of knowing your audience, that's going to help probably determine what channels you're using, I would imagine as well. And that probably comes down to like your company culture. Like, are you a Slack, company? Are people more lean on emails? Can you talk a little bit more about that, Rachel, and sort of like finding that, what's going to work for your company there in terms of like the actual delivering of the information?
Absolutely. And what Garrett was saying earlier, going really direct with the stakeholders is going to prove to be super helpful with really understanding which channel is going to work best. So there's going to be, I'll give you examples for the organization I work for. So our younger business development team loves Slack. Like they like being able to have that direct back and forth with each other or within their group Slack groups. Our sales teams love Slack and using Slack channels as mind share, knowledge share. But then we have other team members, some of our executive team members who really like that monthly newsletter to be able to see that bigger zoom out view of what's happening with competitive intel. So knowing and really asking directly for that feedback. Don't make it a question that you have to answer. Don't put yourself in a silo. Really, your job is to be that bridge builder between all of these different groups. So asking them, hey, are you sick of getting emails? Do you want this in a different way? Also just, providing those different options. So Slack channels, you can have stand-up meetings that are super short and happen quite a bit, or you can have monthly, quarterly meetings, and depending on, particularly with management teams, how often that needs to happen and what information they would like to be able to have in those.
Yeah, you bring up an important point. Ask for the feedback. Everyone's a little bit different. Like I said, company culture is a little bit different. But yeah, ask often, ask early what preferences are, and I think that'll help determine how you're reaching out to folks.
Yeah, and I would say one more thing to add here. I'm very passionate about how we communicate with competitive intelligence, as you can see. But one more thing that I would add to here is, again, I am today a team of one with our competitive intelligence function, which I would take a good guess and bet that there's a lot of you on this call and listening to this recording that you're a team of one. So it's easy to put yourself in that silo being a team of one, but really where you get the absolute most value with competitive intelligence is working as that team member across the stakeholder team. So I might repeat that a couple more times during this message, but really it's proved to be very successful for our function.
Yeah, that's a great point, is, often working in a silo as a team of one, and you really want to be that bridge builder to other teams. And so that's, important thing to remember. Anything you would add there, Garrett?
No, Rachel, I really appreciate the point that you're making. And I think, again, a lot of this goes back to being willing to have tough conversations. This is hard, I think, as marketers, because we like to see success and we like to bring creative solutions to the table. But with something like a CI program, I have been beating this drum and I will keep doing it. We have a chance to elevate this discipline and to speak to the core of the business. So you're not just talking the funnel and how we support sales, maybe touch renewals and parts of the company. You're talking about the company. So if the program exists today, I think a great action for anybody with an existing CI program is to hop off this call and schedule like a CI business review with any relevant stakeholder and just say, we're really passionate, like Rachel said, about making this a success. How are we doing from your perspective? And do you think of us like a small optional service? Or if CI went away at our company tomorrow, would that cripple your insight into the market and our business? You want to be that latter one. And if there's a gap there, start to build a plan to become more critical to that CRO, that CMO, even your CEO. I've heard this countless times over the years, sitting in a QBR where the CEO looks at somebody else and says, who are our top competitors? When they start to look at you, you've just elevated not only your discipline, but your whole career. So I just think it's great for you. It's great for your company. Keep driving it back to that.
Love it. Awesome. All right, we're gonna go on to the next. Presenting results through storytelling. So this is something, Rachel, I know you feel passionately about this. I think obviously we know metrics are important. You're going to present them throughout, QBRs and other times, but just sort of really drive home the importance of competitive intelligence and its effect on your business. Stories are very important there. So Rachel, I'm going to kick this over to you because I know we were talking about this earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about how you weave storytelling into your presentations with your executive team?
Absolutely, yes. So I was going to say executive team. So when we put together a briefing for our executive team, I think the most important piece is one, knowing your audience, knowing what they need to know, but then being able to get to the core of either the problem you're solving or the message that you're trying to relay through telling a story. Quick plug, an amazing book recommendation is called Data Stories. So for any of you product marketers, competitive intelligence folks, an excellent read was recommended to me by an amazing product marketer, Data Story by Nancy Duarte. So definitely take a read. She talks about this at length in her book, but it's really being able to tell the story of a problem you're solving. So I'll give you an example. So we did an executive briefing earlier this year for our full executive team on the state of competitive intelligence halfway through the year. And one of the things that we did highlight, now quick plug for Crayon, we did want to highlight that we had invested in a tool to help us move faster with Crayon. And one of the ways that we showed that was not just showing metrics, not just showing numbers, but showing impact. So for the competitive, and a lot of competitive intelligence tools provide this type of option, but insights, so competitive insights that the machine and tool is bringing. So there were a couple of insights that we were able to use as a campaign for leads to turn to customers. So being able to tell that full story of, here is the insight that we found, that the competitive intelligence team found. Here's what I did hand in hand with, for this example, it was with our business development team. This is what we did with it. This was the competitive strategy we took. And then here's the number of leads that came to it and the number of those leads that closed from that strategy. So great to talk about the tool, but to get to the heart of the matter of why it matters and what the story is and the results can be really, really impactful. So that's
I love that.
one of many.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And you're just like streaming that along from the insight and all the results that came from that one piece. That's amazing. Anything you would add, Garrett, in terms of storytelling and some examples of how you've been successful here?
Well, here's what I'd bring it back to. I think, Rachel, your story about how you escalated this on a biannual basis to your executive team is something we can all learn from, because when you're in that situation, it's really a tale of two presentations. The bad version of this is a presentation that looks like every other QBR that your CEO has to sit through already, which is usually 2 or 3 days of data on slides in very tiny font. Right. So it's like a sales leader that shows all of these deals we kind of won or barely lost and where they're going to hit and what we're going to do next. That's very difficult for an executive to take in real time. It's a lot of information and they're really on the back foot. You want to think of your executive stakeholders like the most powerful partner you have for your program. They should not be on the back foot saying, I don't really understand this data. Can you tell me more? Can I trust this? That's an executive that has not been taught to trust your program. What you want is somebody that buys into your story. And so, like Rachel is saying, it's not just taking the data from Crayon and saying, look at this win-loss information that's available in Crayon. Let's talk about the win-loss. It's taking a step back and saying, hey, executive, do you remember how we heard 4 or 5 or 6 times these little fires popping up this quarter with our sales team? Do you remember how distracting that was and how it took your team off of the phones? They were freaking out on Slack. Do you remember how much kind of a stir that caused on the sales floor and how that's really not a productive activity? We can fix that. And the way we're fixing that is by putting it in context. That competitor that kept popping up on social ads or maybe appeared in a deal or two, here's what they really mean to our business. Small threat, small amount of dollars at risk. Here's what we think it'll be next quarter. That's something that executive can take in and say, I think our business is going to be okay, because you're speaking the executive language. It's not even really at their level. I don't think that's the right way to think about this, because marketing isn't somehow less than executive speak. It's just learning to translate this from, we typically talk about campaigns and product launch, into you're an executive, you care about a wider scope on the business. We're going to become a critical leg on your stool as you look to be successful for the next quarter, 2 quarters, or year. So I think that translation, it has a lot of power. And Rachel's example earlier, I think that was spot on.
Yeah, and something I think about every single time I go into a presentation that I'm leading, no matter the stakeholder group, is what's the one takeaway that I want them to take from this? Because truly, it's going to be one that they remember. Maybe a couple others, maybe someone's feeling really on fire that day, but what's the one thing you want them to take away from that? And to me, stories become the most impactful way for them to take that away, because it piles everything up into a story. And we all know, I mean, I'd much rather be told a story than look at a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I love that. So you're kind of like, build, here's the takeaway, and then build the story from there. I think that's super helpful. I'm going to pause here for a second. Connor, do we have any questions from the group that we can ask Rachel and Garrett?
Couple questions, and you sort of started to answer the first one just now, Rachel. I was curious to learn more about the process of building that story. So like you just said, you identify what do we want them to walk away with, and then work from there. So I guess my question is, how do you make that determination of this is the takeaway we want them to walk? Because presumably there are a lot of messages that you'd like to send to them. How do you whittle it down and decide we could have them walk away with these 3 things, but this is the number one, this is the message we have to get across?
Absolutely. So I had 20 minutes with an executive team, and making that decision on what's the most important things to talk about in 20 minutes of a much longer meeting that they are sitting in is you have to be extremely strategic in what you want that to be. So this was one tiny part of that 20-minute. But as you can imagine, getting all the information I would need to tell that story took, one, being that bridge, speaking with our business development team, seeing what the metrics were that came from that campaign, having historical evidence on what that looked like, and using the Crayon tool. That was one piece. You know, we talked about win-loss and what things had looked like in the first half of the year versus the year prior versus the year before that, and having the context there. So there were so many other things we covered, but it was important that I could package all of that up in 60 seconds. So maybe one answer to your question is, I didn't do it by myself, and there were many other people involved for me to get that information so that I could boil it down for a COO, a CFO, a CEO to be able to digest and take away. But that was just one of many pieces that I would be presenting to an executive team. This made the most sense for us because this was an investment we had done the year prior. And so we needed to provide some type of update on what that impact has been with that investment. And to me, this was a really good way for us to show that impact because it was directly connected to revenue dollars. So does that answer somewhat?
It does. It totally does. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I have one quick follow-up, and then we have a question from the audience. We talked about cadence before, and you both agreed that you need to cater to the preferences of the people you're communicating with. So let's say you have a bi-weekly cadence or a monthly cadence. I assume that's too short of a window for there to always be a story to tell. So do either of you have any thoughts on what is the proper cadence for? This is enough of a window for us to tell a real story. Is it quarterly? Is it every other quarter? Does that make sense?
Would you say with an executive team or other management structures?
Sure, yeah, with an executive team.
Yeah, I only meet with our executive team twice a year. And so
Okay.
those have to be very impactful times. There's always one-off times where I'm asked for information or data or things like that, but a true presentation, and in some ways it's worked, in a lot of ways it's worked great for us because we can really provide biggest, most important impact of what's going on. Whereas we have a much more often recurring cadence with our our VPs of sales, VPs of product, VPs of services and support. We meet with them on a much more regular basis than the executive team.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I'm getting at is on that more frequent cadence with those other stakeholders, you're not coming up with like this big, beautiful story every time on that, right?
No, definitely not. Now, I try to weave storytelling into everything. So when we have our recurring meet with our sales team, we make sure that there is a segment of stories from the field every single time we meet in some shape or form, because it is important to be able to draw it back to, well, this is what someone else did and the impact of what happens there. So we do stories from this field all the time in different capacity, but the big kaboom stories that might happen in a biannual briefing, definitely no.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do one more and then we'll start to move into some of the slide deck examples.
Yeah, we got a question from the audience here. What type of information are you including when it comes to competitive intelligence? My updates often just include a report out of what the competition is doing. So I guess to help this person, aside from saying this competitor did this, what else are you including in that presentation?
So with an executive team, very much win-loss information and historical data. So just generally the state of competition, whether it's with the bucket of our opportunities, the bucket of our wins, and the bucket of our losses, seeing if that breakdown from a competitive perspective looks different from the year before. And if it does, that we do the research and work to give some assumptions and guesses, educated guesses on why we think that might be, depending on the research and information that we've gathered with those competitors over that, whatever that time period is, 6 months, a year. So did so-and-so's acquisition of this tool affect what our win rate looked like with this competitor? Yes or no? If it did, then that would be a great thing to provide an executive leadership team, because is that something our products team needs to be aware of? So having that insight into, if you're just looking at a pie graph of what 2023 looks like versus 2022, having those takeaways on why we believe it looks different from the year before. That's a big piece of what I do, because that does give the full view of what's going on from a competitive perspective.
Rachel, I love that point, and I think this touches on a core opportunity for a lot of us on this call, which is we're a young function. We are learning how to be more effective as a key strategic partner for the business. Think about how you have already defined CI for your executives. If we went without you in the room and sat them all down and said, tell me what CI means at your company. What kind of data points does that include? What would you expect from a CI standard report twice a year or every quarter? they're going to tell you what they think this program is and what it means to their business. That's a massive opportunity to reset that to something that's either a little more narrowly focused because it's kind of all over the place. You're not telling a very tight story and you need to tighten that up. Or on the flip side, which is what I think this question is getting to broaden how they think about your discipline. And if you're feeling pigeonholed, like I'm the person that's going to scroll through Crayon, I might pull a little Salesforce data, and I'm putting a whole bunch of numbers on slides, and it's kind of boring every single quarter. It's just, here's what happened, here's what happened. That's looking in the rearview mirror. You have an opportunity to supercharge your career. And the way that you do that is by broadening the scope of what CI means to your business. I made this mistake a ton as a young CI owner when I would go with the same information every time we were asked and basically repeat that program. You want to broaden that out and say, we can actually tell you a lot of things you're asking corporate strategy, a lot of things you're looking to your sales heads for. We are the ones that pull those things together and not just give you data, we give you insight. So I would really encourage you to go back and look at that definition of CI in your business.
There will always be room, in my opinion, there will always be room for certain initiatives, right? Because I would think about there are going to be different problems that come up that need to be solved across the organization. And if it's from a market or competitive perspective, we have a play in being able to support that. So another example is in this most recent briefing I had with our team, there was a specific initiative that we had spent time on that quarter before, and giving a brief overview and understanding of what came from that, what we're doing in the future. It was important to cover that. Now, is that going to be in the next briefing? Probably not, because as we continue to solve problems, the landscape's going to look different every quarter and every 6 months in any business and what that looks like. So it's good to be flexible. We're flexible day in and day out as a competitive intelligence analyst and what we're doing and supporting. So it makes sense that that will look different each time you meet.
Yeah, that's a great point, is the landscape's going to change. So make sure you're changing what you're talking about with that and that you're on top of it. We're going to move on from here and go through a little bit, like I said, of just some slide examples from other companies. I think it's kind of helpful. Sometimes people like to see the tactical of like, what are people presenting to their exec teams? And we'll kind of walk through some of those. But just as kind of a reminder, we talked to some of our customers here at Crayon and asked them, just in terms of data, obviously you need storytelling. In terms of data, what are some of the common KPIs that folks are including when they are presenting to leadership teams? So this is just a short list of sort of the most common things that we're seeing. We've got a lot of resources if you want to dig into these a little bit further on our blog, but these are, again, some of the common KPIs that we hear about or we see from our customers when they're presenting. All right, so let's get into some of the slide examples because I think this will be fun. This was from a company, and Garrett and Rach and I were talking a little bit about this. We called this the level set slide, as a sort of just good slide to remind everyone of what you do. And then Garrett, maybe you can provide a little more context here and sort of why you like, or maybe anything maybe you could improve upon this slide, but why you like this type of slide.
Yeah, 100%. Well, what I like about it, first of all, is that it touches on that previous question. I think there's a universal pain with a lot of our teams, which is the question, am I doing a good job? And there's not like a senior CI person waiting in the wings to tell you that you're doing a great job, right? It's a young function, so you have to figure it out. I do think this is a good baseline, and I think it's a good baseline for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's fairly clear and well-defined. This is something you could rebrand, maybe redesign a little bit to fit your company's branding and communication structure, but it's very clear on what you think the program is. And I think you should be opinionated on this. This is, again, an area where I'm pushing everybody on this call to be a little bit bolder and a little more opinionated internally. You should be opinionated on what the definition of your CI program is and not let that be dictated by what data is being asked of you. Lead that, be proactive. The second thing I like about this is it's broader than just a couple of data points from Salesforce, from Crayon, from win-loss. Again, this is not just a numbers game. You can't bring an updated numbers slide like a sales leader can every single quarter and expect that to tell the story. And I think this is something, speaking of universal pain, that we have all felt as people that mostly came from product marketing and marketing in general. over the last 3 years, which is marketing has steadily become way more intense through that crunch of the big boom of the pandemic and now the downturn following the pandemic. A lot of our teams are smaller. We're wearing more hats than ever, and we're still being asked to do more. And I think in the swirl of that tornado, the thing that gets lost is the energy and the optimism to be that chief storyteller. And you've got to do it. If you're feeling like that's falling away and you're falling back on, I'll just update the slide, I'll bring a few data points, I'm going to survive this QBR, I've got 9 other things on my task list. You really need to find a way to kind of set that down, get back to being that chief storyteller. Nobody else is going to do that for you. So again, if your slide looks a little bit like this, where it's a couple of data points and not a lot of story, I think that's where you have a big opportunity following the webinar today. Is lean into that, be bold, tell an awesome story, and you'll find that more people come to you.
Anything you would add to that, Rachel, in terms of the level set slide that we talked about earlier?
No, I just think it's good to be able to know outlining exactly what you're going to provide, and with whatever team that you're talking to, whether it's an executive team or a management team below that. And one thing that did come to mind when Garrett was just talking was just, I think competitive intelligence is so fun. We get to sit in the middle of so much exciting stuff. Now, are some days better than others when it comes to competition? Sure, of course. But we have like a very privileged seat within an organization. So this, I encourage everyone to try to have fun with this too. I mean, competition is important and we want to win as much as we can. But something Garrett said recently to me was, you got to have competition. It's no fun if there's no competition, and there really isn't a market if there isn't competition. I think we would be worried if there weren't for any industry that you play in, right? So being able to find ways to make it fun, even when we're presenting things to like to an executive leadership team, I think is really important. Because if you bring that energy, and I think the word passion has been said a lot, but if you bring that energy to the table, the engagement ends up flooding the gates. And that's been the experience at Arc Smart.
All right, so we've covered this one. Make sure, again, that you're reminding everyone why you exist, what your function is, and be bold. Here's another example. Rachel and I talked a little bit about this slide before, and how sometimes you don't have a lot of time with your executive team, so you're trying to kind of put a whole bunch in there at once, and maybe that's not the greatest strategy. So Rachel, why don't you can kick this one off?
Yeah, so
what you might change, or what your thoughts are on this particular slide.
Absolutely. I think again, I'm going to talk about the book Data Story again, because it was really impactful for me building out presentations for different groups. But knowing what the audience needs and what they need in the time allotted that you have, and what we really think they can actually ingest. Now, is there room for this in an appendix? Is there room for something like this as further material to be able to provide? Absolutely. I am such a big fan of giving an appendix, especially when it comes to what we're doing. And again, storytelling is so important, but if you don't have the hard metrics and data to be able to back up what you're trying to convey and you talk about, it ends up going a little null, what you're trying to convey for the compete function. So it is a delicate balance. And I think giving this kind of information is important, but just knowing, if you have an hour to talk, you probably would have time to talk through this slide and give a really good understanding of the structure. But if not, I think there can always be room in an appendix. And with every executive team, there are going to be members who ingest information differently. So there will be a person who just wants the big picture, but there will also be a person who wants all of the nitty-gritty details to be able to look back on later. So I think that would be another important thing to note, is to know your audience, even as specific as that. And if that's you having to ask other VPs and folks who are closer to your executive team, to know that will be great. Because if you've got a certain stakeholder who loves having the nitty-gritty, and you provide that, talk about the value and impact that you're going to be able to provide after that initial meet with that executive team member. I mean, game changer for the competitive function to be able to have that. But you don't want to spend 10 minutes on a certain slide if your CEO is totally just a big vision person and wants to know, well, what do you think based on the data? So again, we said it already. I'll say it again, know your audience, but there's definitely value here.
It's a good point, and it's a good point that you bring up. Do a little bit of homework. Yeah, ask ask and find out, so that you know that you're tailoring your presentation and what's going to work. Because again, yeah, you don't have a lot of time often in these situations, and you want to make it as impactful as possible. Anything that you would add maybe there, Garrett?
Well, yeah, here's what I would say. I would use this slide, and I would use it one time, and not on a recurring basis, not one time a year, a single time. And I think it's appropriate to use this slide when you're getting permission or approval to build a CI program, because that's what this is. It says, here's what this will be, here's what we will do, and here's what we will deliver. But if you're showing something like this, every time you're in front of an executive, you are losing their attention, you're breaking their trust, and you're demonstrating you don't understand what they need from you to make decisions and to be your ally, to be your partner. I just think as you step up a little bit more into those executive ranks and get FaceTime directly with your C-suite and your CEO, it's super critical to not have the mindset of like, oh boy, it's a big meeting today. This is a really big meeting today. It's just a meeting, like everything else you're doing in your career, and you need something from them just like they need something from you. You need to remember that they need an effective CI program, that there's value they don't know about yet, and that they're about to discover how you can be one of the best partners they have in that organization. So would I show a slide like this? One single time. But after that, you need to shift into being the chief storyteller. When you sit down across from that exec, you lead the conversation, you are proactive, you're somebody that has it together, and you have a very concise story that you run through. That's how you get an effective partnership. And you always have a goal in mind for these conversations, right? It's not like we're providing a passive update to this executive. It's we're telling them how successful this is, where there are weaknesses in the business, and what they need to do about it in partnership with you to make sure the business is more successful next quarter. So when you frame it that way, use this once, throw it in the recycling bin, move on to a story.
Love that.
What Garrett just said reminds me of a quick story. So to that point, I think there should always be a purpose, a very strong either problem to solve or question to answer when you walk into a room like that for a meeting. Again, not making it, I'm amen here to what Garrett said. This is a meeting and you should be excited because you're about to provide them more information for them to do their jobs better in leading the organization, which is so exciting and so cool. So knowing what that problem is. So here's the example. If you have a sales team who has been constantly knocking at your door of like, oh my gosh, we have all of this pressure from competitor X. We're losing, the morale is tough, XYZ. If that's what you keep hearing for a quarter, your job as a competitive intelligence leader is, one, is that true? I totally believe the sentiment of the sales team, but one, let's look at the data and make sure that's true. Because if it is, then let's double down and help these folks on the line and find ways to help them better compete, whether it's from a sales strategy perspective, a product strategy perspective, whatever that is. But if it's not, being able to show that data and tell that story and help the morale and get buy-in from your leadership on, hey, how can we help solve this problem to make sure that our sales team feels confident in this way? This is somewhat of an example of something I've dealt with in the past of having that data actually, in the circumstance I'm thinking of, it actually wasn't as big of a compete as they thought. And our win-loss program was able to provide that information of actually competitors weren't even being looked at from our prospects, but we're so on top of it from a compete perspective. There were assumptions being made, things like that. But being able to level set and get to your leadership team, show the answers and the data to what they might be feeling too from different stakeholder groups, that is helpful for people to move forward.
Yeah, and that's a really great point about sort of the perception that sometimes is out there is not actually what's happening. So you're the person that's helping to clarify that and helping to prove out.
Support it. I mean, our frontline runners, that is not an easy job. So anything that we can do to help and support them in that way, whether it's help them diffuse anxiety or the pressure that they might be feeling, while still being excellent competitors in this space is totally something that could be part of what's on your shoulders for compete.
Agree, 100%. Love that. All right, so this is a little fuzzy, but our next slide we wanted to talk through is you're all probably creating lots of CI assets, a lot of CI collateral. Are you showing how it's being used? So this was something from a customer of ours. Ignore again the fuzziness, but just trying to prove out that the stuff is valuable that I'm creating, and the folks on my team are using it daily, weekly, you know, to get the information that they need. Anything you might add here, Rachel, in terms of showing again what you're creating and how it's being used to the executive team?
Yeah, so I just, again, being really focused, being able to find ways to tell a particular story when it comes to what you want to show. With adoption, I think the first story that I told at the beginning of the webinar is a great example of being able to bring it home. But also just with general slide etiquette, making it extremely clear what you're trying to look at so that when you're talking to a slide, it's very clear. Here's what I want your takeaway to be. I know we've got bars and we've got numbers and graphs, but here's the piece that's highlighted, or here's the piece that's circled that is most important. And again, this is no new concept for anyone on this call, probably, but just a call out how important that is.
Love that. Anything you would add, Garrett, to this?
No, I think that was a great point. And the thing that I would say is if you're using a chart like this, I would use it in kind of two contexts. Number one, what does the team think they're doing with your deliverables, which this could be that. It's how often are you self-reporting that you're hitting these assets or these resources? That's a very interesting snapshot because it tells you a lot about how the sales team or other part of the organization sees itself. But you should then marry it as closely as you can with actual usage data and show that to the executive audience. That's not like a sales manager conversation typically, but the CRO really cares about that. Something like, we think we're fighting against random competitor A all of the time, right? They're 10 out of 10 on our threat chart. We think it's a big growing problem. We believe in the next 6 months, they're coming for our lunch. But then you show them the data that they popped up in 2% of our deals. All of the deals were maybe SMB, hypothetically, and they're not threatening our revenue. You show those two things to a CRO, they know exactly what to do. It's to retrain the team to stop freaking out about that competitor, focus on winning deals against your, in this case, hypothetical mid-market and enterprise market, and move on with their lives, right? That's how you drive a decision and you drive a better business outcome, rather than saying, they're self-reporting that they love battle cards. We think battle cards are great. That's a very weak version of this, where you're saying self-reporting is truth. We're going to do something with that data. Marry self-reporting with hard data when you can, and you'll get a better outcome.
Yeah, and another place to be able to, and again, this could be a bit repetitive with what Garrett was saying, was just being able to take this adoption and connect it with, well, how are we doing against that competitor compared to when we maybe didn't have those battle cards or didn't have this platform or didn't have XYZ on competitor ABC. So being able to connect that historically will be helpful too.
That's a great point. Yeah, having that before and after story is important, especially as your program is evolving. You want to be able to clearly show that. So we've got one more sort of slide to talk through. This is a little bit of a crayon plug because this is based on like if you're using a CI platform, which some companies are investing in. We've got some numbers that one of our customers shows and how the platform is working for them. The big one here, influence revenue, is always a good thing to show. Garrett, I'll let you take this slide since it's pretty close to crayon.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say two things here. If I'm the program owner and I'm using this slide with our internal executive team, I would do two things. Number one, I would highlight the top metrics as good indicators that the program is doing things, right? So it's collecting insights. Okay, that's good. It's not speaking to quality. It's not talking about like who you're tracking and why. You've probably dealt with that in a different meeting, but it's showing that you're doing the program. That's good. Asset views. People are looking at deliverables. That's, again, it's a proxy for do people find these things valuable? And if they do, if that's a high number for your organization, They probably do because it helps them win more or understand the market more if it's a CEO, whatever. And then insights being highlighted, same kind of thing. It's an added metric that's a proxy for value. The thing I would say on influenced revenue is this is the most powerful thing in a lot of your tool belts because it ties it to dollars. But you need to tee this up. You need to be very careful because if you charge in and use this kind of like an Apple one more thing surprise at the end of the conversation. By the way, one more thing, $7.6 million influenced revenue by CI. The first thing that executive will say 9 times out of 10 is, I don't believe you. Tell me more about that number. How did you arrive at that? Are you sure that's true? Can we trust Salesforce? Where does this come from? And you'll spin down this rabbit hole of defending a very large number instead of driving it back to, we had a goal, we did a bunch of things, this is one indicator of the outcome. We'll see you again next month or next quarter. You really don't want to surprise them and pull it into, that number's kind of scary. If I trust you too much and it's too good to be true, I'm going to get burned. So I'm instead going to burn the CI team. Prep them that this is coming. And it might look like the first time you meet, you're training them on the outcomes you're looking for. And one of them is we would expect to see influence in the pipeline. And hey, by the way, Crayon has a way to do that. We'll see you in a couple of months, exec team. Then you leave it hanging and you say, we're going to do these things. You come back in a couple of months. They're prepared for that and they're expecting that from you. So you deliver on the expectation. And above and beyond that, you give them a great number that shows success and that you can build on and report over time. That's a much better way of bringing this into your conversation. So I think this is super powerful. The customer that put this together is crushing it. But again, remember, you are training the executive team to think about CI in a new way. And that goes for the data too.
Any number you put on a presentation deck, you should have the full context of what goes behind that number. So whether that's you teeing it up or you having it to be able to provide when and if and when those questions come up.
Yeah, that's a really great reminder. We had a customer mention that in a former an earlier webinar we did a couple months ago. Knowing, sort of anticipating what questions you're going to get is very important, especially you've got data and then thinking through, okay, with this data, what questions can I anticipate getting, and obviously having the answers ready for those. But very important, again, because you're not going to probably have a ton of time, so you're going to want to make sure you're really sharp there. Awesome. Well, I loved going through all of those with both of you. That was fun. I just want to open everything up now to questions from the audience, and we'll go through as many of those as we can in the last few 10 or so minutes. Just a quick plug, we're doing our State of Competitive Intelligence report. So we have a survey. I'll send it out in the follow-up with the recording. Would love folks to take that, and you'll be part of our 2024 State of CI. And then also, if you want to get in touch with Rachel or Garrett, this is their info if you want to shoot them a message through LinkedIn. So Connor, I'll pass it over to you with some of the questions that have been coming through.
Yeah. Real quick, Sheila, I think were you just now referring to our webinar with Scott?
Yes.
Frost. Yes, I also I wrote down Scott Frost because he had some advice that's very relevant to this conversation. He said, don't surprise me. Yes. So anytime you're preparing to present to executive team, don't surprise them. Send them the deck in advance, let them process it, and then present. And then also, hide the answers to your anticipated questions in that appendix that Rachel mentioned. Shout out to Scott. We have an anonymous attendee who is pitching standing up a CI program. So they're making the business case for an official CI function. And they're trying to tie the activities of the CI function to the business's 2024 OKRs, which objectives and key results. Do either of you have any experience in that, specifically taking a set of goals that the business has set and then trying to work backwards to what you do as a CI pro and trying to make the business case that way? Can either of you speak to that?
Rachel, go ahead.
So I don't have experience with the goals being set and then me having to fit into them. I've been very lucky to be on the other side of that seat where I've been able to be part of the goal, creating the strategic goals for the company, whether it's peripherally or directly. So a lot of times in the last few years, our strategic initiatives for our company, it's been very, very clear for us which aspects of those connects to. So I must say, I don't know if I have experience with being on the other end, and that makes me very, very lucky competitive analyst.
I will say this, I think if the business objective is outward facing, you almost certainly can tie CI to it. So if it's something like, we want our employees to be more satisfied working here, not really the application for CI, right? It's not competitive, it doesn't deal with revenue in the sales team, but if it touches on growth, revenue attainment, diversifying the business, new products, new geographies, surviving the craziness of the last couple of years, digital transformation. These are just off the top of my head. Anything like that, you can tie this program to it, and not only tie it to it, but be a critical part of how you measure and influence success. So work backwards is the right approach. I think this person is on the right path, but be really critically engaged. If they're saying something like, we're an old business, we need to become renewed, revitalized with a new product that's like SaaS and targets a new buyer, you can have a huge part of that by drilling in and saying, why? Who is that buyer? What is changing about our company? Why does the existing structure not work? How are we charging today? What needs to be different? Will we see different competitive logos? Will we see the same logos, but in different proportions of competitiveness? And once you understand those things, just kind of play dumb. This is one of the best tactics you will ever have in a room with an executive is, I don't understand something basic. I don't understand something basic. Tell me more. Is getting them to explain it in their words. It's so effective because you're coming in as the partner. They have 20 years experience in that chair or in that industry. Just keep asking basic questions of, why are we changing it? Who's the new buyer? Why does the business need this? I don't understand why our gross margin means what you say it means. And you'll get to the core of it. You'll get to why they're putting their time towards certain strategies in 2024. Once you can do that, you bring in CI, you show them the metrics you have access to and how you're going to help drive success. That's the way to really work backwards to a place where you can help.
Another plug for the person who asked this question, anybody who was wondering the same thing. We have resources about this very topic. So on our blog, you can find a post about making the business case for your CI program. And then also Crayon Academy, the architect course is pretty much about this. So free resources that you can find on our website, they speak to exactly this very topic. Rachel, do you ever, as you're preparing to present, whether it's on the biannual basis with your exec team or the more frequent meetings with other stakeholders, do you ever pressure test your presentations with folks who won't be at that meeting, like a coworker, where you send it to them and just bounce it off them and ask, does this make sense? Is this clear?
Oh, absolutely. There is never a big meeting like that I am not test running it. So in my past life, I was in classical music and was an opera singer, a performer. So everything was about rehearsal. So I would challenge everyone on this call to be sure that is being pressure tested. I am the biggest fan of rehearsing and making sure that you are getting that feedback so that you're providing the best and most effective punch when you're presenting, especially to leadership.
I have, how much time do we have?
Garrett's almost about to run out of the room for another meeting. Well, let's get through maybe like another question here.
I have one more.
Right.
It's a little silly, but I know a little bit of a high note. Yeah. There's a little bit of a joke on the internet that executives are the worst emailers. Like the emails are like, the grammar is always terrible. They can't spell. So I'm thinking about the other marketers who are on this call, and they might be thinking, I would spend too much time trying to make the slides look pretty for the executive team, but I have a hunch that audience does not really care about that. Can either you confirm or deny that suspicion? Because again, I think there are people on this call who would spend too much time making things look pretty and not enough on everything else we've talked about today.
Yes, simplicity is everything for these, right? Simplicity is everything, making it so clear, and it'll probably hurt your soul a little bit with what you might have to do. And I think there's a nice balance. There's always going to be a balance here of what you can do with these decks. The appendix will be your friend, even if it ends up just being your friend. It will be great for you to have in that sense. But yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of simplicity with that stakeholder group.
Strongly agree.
All right. With that, I think we're gonna wrap up. Just want to thank both of our speakers, Rachel and Garrett, for an awesome session today. And just a reminder that we will share out the recording with everyone who came today. If you have any follow-up questions, just be sure to reach out to us. We're happy to keep the conversation going. And just have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.